Hello, welcome to the Big Strategy Podcast. I'm your host and fellow strategist, Jeff Hyatt. This is your go-to spot for real talk with the masterminds of business strategy. It's about sharing stories, insights, and those little nuggets of wisdom to help you unlock big growth. Let's turn the key and spring into action.
So in the US, we get a lot of foreign labor looking to come and establish businesses here. But what happens when those folks experience success in America and look to seed the startup ecosystem back home? That's what Kash is here to talk about today. So Kash, I appreciate you joining us and talking for this summer read series to talk about your book and your experience as an entrepreneur, but most importantly, that flow of capital, ideas, expertise from the US back to benefit folks in India. And so with that being said, I will allow you to respond and we'll kick things off.
Thanks for having me here, Jeff. Excited to be here. And it's a topic close to heart. Let's dive in.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're both sitting in the Bay Area. So it's natural to think that we are a magnet for all the resources necessary to launch a company, technology, talent, capital, etc. What was your experience in India and then your experience here? And what was the balance between those two? And what was the disconnect that prompted you to say, no, I can do more?
That's a great question. I've been building startups for 25 years now, both in the India and the US markets. And when I first started in 99, this is during the dot-com bubble, which became the dot-bomb a year later. The mental model in India was that you have all these internet businesses being built in the US, and let's see which one of those apply to India as well. And, from a US perspective, it wasn't uncommon to say that India is a market of copycat businesses. You build an online bookstore here, and then suddenly there's a online bookstore in India. You build an online travel thing here, an online job board here, which in my book I call the this for that economy. It's a phrase that came from Tiger Global Management when they were looking to invest in India. And I think that continued for more than a decade, more like 15 years or so through 2015. It was the globalization phenomenon where many of the ideas were innovated here in the US and were adapted and cloned in the India market. And of course, in the India market, there's a lot of nuances to what's the internet penetration, what is the GDP growth and the GDP per capita, what's the supply chain for some of these marketplaces or online businesses, what has changed drastically. And actually within that globalization context, I would say 2013 to 2015-ish was the time frame when the big money started coming to India, where the check sizes into startups were in the $100 million range for the first time ever. Because before that, it used to be sort of single digit and lower double digit in millions. And it was still following what's happened in the rest of the world. And the rest of the world also included China now. What happened at scale there, let's bring it to India. And some bubble dynamics had formed, and that was sort of the basis of the book. I was looking at e-commerce in India and how there were some bubble dynamics. What has happened now, since then, over the last decade, is, I would say, significantly different, where the access to talent, the access to capital, the access to technologies is more democratic now. It is more sort of easily available no matter where you are in the world. And if you think about it, during COVID, when all the tech companies said, well, you can work from home, it became remote first and hybrid, and we still carry that to the day. It doesn't matter where people are sitting. And also there's a market maturity to a few cycles happening, the dot-com cycle followed by the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, followed by the globalization bubble that uniquely impacted India in funding during the 2015 fall cycle, where the China markets crashed and it had a profound impact on India. So after these wildfires or forest fires, there's a new habitat that showed up. The public market depth in India, to list in India is much, much better. The access to funds with LPs being in the US or being in other parts of the world or being in India, that is also flatter. The talent pool is also flatter. And all of that leads to true innovation coming up from India, where it doesn't matter whether it's the India market or the global market. It's getting similar valuations as what's available in the US, building similar innovative businesses, for the world.
And so your opinion is that it's reached that point.
Yes, I think we're almost a decade to the cycle where you'll have Indian entrepreneurs staying in India, raising good money to build innovative businesses for the world, building innovative businesses for the deep Indian consumer market. I mean, it is a country of 1.4 billion people after all, of which, a couple of 100 million households are spending households. And ideas that apply to immediately adjacent markets like the Middle East or Southeast Asia or Africa and the global South, but also ideas that started in India but are category leaders worldwide, including, the deep market of the West.
I think you tell that story so succinctly, but it really highlights a fundamental shift, and that so much has happened over the last 10 plus years at this point that it's hard to put it in context. But you literally had a market in India that was a copycat market, partially driven by limited capital, those smaller check sizes, as you talked about. Talent was going to the West because that was still where the opportunity was viewed. But over the last 10 to 12 years, it's been this seismic shift, and you just touched on it there at the end. I want to make sure it's highlighted. From your vantage point, there are ideas being born in India that are relevant to major markets around the world, agnostic of will this be adopted in the West?
Correct. Yes. Yes. And I think capital is part of it. Knowledge is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of time it used to take to get the latest and greatest that's happening in the world in a way that you can actually build with. It used to take a long time to get that access.
Is this soft information? Is it products? What was the limiting factor? Because and maybe I'm going with a bias, but it seems as though, if the Indian diaspora was obviously highly trained in terms of and the engineering field. And so is it that there was elements of being an engineer that were missing, or was it the tools to make good engineers great that were missing?
Yeah, I would say both. I remember in the early 2000s, I still used a calling card to call my parents. The whole idea of these rich chat communication things, or just being able to, being connected while being mobile, all of these phenomena, WhatsApp and the mobile phone and, richer messaging that just obviated phone calls and video calls and chat, just staying connected in a more meaningful way led to things where, hey, do you know that I just pressed a button and a car showed up? Just that casual chat was now possible, where earlier I was conserving my minutes on a calling card to talk to my girlfriend in a long-term relationship. And then, of course, there were certain hardware tools and licenses where you needed deeper stuff to show up in India through a local reseller and get access to that. And, the cloud technologies really took off in the mid 2000s as well. So now you were in a world where the world's latest and greatest software was available to you by swiping a card on the internet. And then came the pay-per-use economy, where all this software now was available without a big investment in a purchase. So even with purchasing power parity and the currency difference, you can actually do bite-sized consumption of the latest and greatest technologies. So you sort of, talent going back to India would not be viable, because once you're used to a certain income level in the US, you wanted to make,
right,
you couldn't step down too much. And then as the local market, even copycat business, started paying people so well that they were happy to move back, global talent, the top talent was happy to quit Google and Amazon and Facebook and go back to India and make substantial money where their savings were higher than in the US. All that became possible.
Obviously that's a wonderful to hear that trend, the historical trend had reversed and that this was going back. So what would be an example of a powerful idea that may have led an Indian entrepreneur to leave the West and go back because of there was such an opportunity at home?
Yeah, I can think of, one of the top data scientists of the world, in my opinion. He won the President's Gold Medal at IIT Bombay, an elite sort of college, and was at a very senior position in Google doing search quality, sort of the core of what the world was using, who then became the chief scientist or data scientist at the largest e-commerce company in India, which, Flipkart was acquired by Walmart and
Sure.
essentially Walmart India. And, is happy to be close to home and, make a good buck while being close to home, solving problems locally. Another example is a top sort of student, again, of my college who was in a fairly senior position at Qualcomm at headquarters, moved back and started the Qualcomm India office, which is now, I don't know, close to 1,000 people.
Wow.
And earlier it was all back office stuff that used to go back. And now they're creating, new algorithms, chipsets, IP that Qualcomm is known for. That's their KPI is the same as any other Qualcomm office in the US. And then, there are entrepreneurs who went back and, or who either never left or went back and started businesses. Browser stack comes to mind, where every company wants to test their website on different browser versions. It's a hard problem. Similarly, you want to test your app on different mobile phone versions. Making that a cloud product was an innovative idea. It's the kind of idea that would come up, in Silicon Valley. And these boys, fresh grads, started building that in India. And that, sure enough, became the global leader in browser testing and app testing software. Similarly, just as Aura Ring, which I'm wearing right now, was built by a Finnish company when Fitbit and Jawbone actually, arguably failed in the US to capture a similar market.
That is absolutely accurate. Yes.
You have an Indian company called Ultrahuman who is competing with Aura and is already well past the phase where Jawbone was. And, it's an Indian company, sold in India, then sold in the Middle East, and now set up a manufacturing facility in the US.
Wow. Only be a tailwind to Indian entrepreneurs who are looking to find export markets for their ideas and their products. And to hear that there are competitors like you talked about having the opportunity to come into this market and really disrupt it in a fresh way, I think can only benefit us, and not only Americans as consumers, but also entrepreneurs who choose to be closer to family, be closer to a culture that's native to them, and be able to be authentic to that as well as a successful entrepreneur.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of now people from Apple who used to spend lots of time in China as the phones were getting built, and who are Indian, and then set up a manufacturing facility in India, especially because Apple wanted the next 100 million consumers. They figured India has a high demand for iPhones. And this person was very happy setting up the manufacturing in India. Apple gets a new market. This person gets to apply his learning of manufacturing in his home country. And then he moves on to, in his future life, build products for India or for the world using the knowledge he has. Similarly, Amazon fulfillment centers, where I know how the early folks who set up Amazon fulfillment centers in India, when Amazon entered the India market, are, creating great supply chain logistics, warehouse companies in India or in the adjacent markets.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. What would be other findings that you found in your book? You talk about this flow of capital, the ability of talent to stay local, and just these wonderful companies that are really disrupting. What else did you find as you researched your book or as you wrote that really resonated and would benefit executives to understand about this India-US dynamic?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first, so when I wrote the book, the audience that I had in mind was Indians who were reading newspapers talking about this company gets $100 million in funding, this company gets $30 million in funding. It was mind-boggling. These are big amounts for India. And the questions were, wait, why now? But is this a scam? Is this what is going on? It was like a tsunami where we haven't seen it before dissected for us. So that was my primary audience. Then what I found over the years, to my surprise, was a lot of the global investors in China, Japan, South Africa, US, UK, Hong Kong had a copy of my book on their desks. And the reason was they were trying to see the investment opportunities in India and also dissect what's a bubble and what's real, what's a myth and what's the reality on the ground. Investors were writing checks after 30-minute, 1-hour Zoom calls. And once it got competitive, it was your classic FOMO dynamic.
Sure.
But then there's so many differences in the market where you have to smell the soil to sort of understand if the same crop will grow or what adaptation is needed. So the book stuck with a lot of investors. So then I could see it through their vantage point. One of the insights I can share with you, which the investors found fascinating, was India being a country of 1.4 billion people and being a low trust economy because it's really hard to enforce systems and processes and laws at that level. There is a huge role that the middlemen played in any transaction happening. So your classic American marketplaces are about disintermediation, whereas a lot of the digital marketplaces in India started off as broker enablement, agent enablement, where the customer was not the end consumer, the customer was the middleman. I'll give you an example. There's a company called Meesho, which is in the top 3 e-commerce companies of India now. And it was entirely built as a reseller network over chat for home and fashion products. They're a much broader category now. But you hear of Amazon, you hear of Walmart. There's a whole graveyard of e-commerce companies in India that did not make it. And then you hear that in the same league as Amazon and Walmart in India is this company called Meesho, which rode the insight of it's an enabler middleman economy. How can I give the power of digital to these middlemen?
Mm-hmm.
Another way to think about it is the number of middlemen in India. And if you see their purchasing power and their income per capita is equivalent to the population of Germany.
Wow.
Right?
I had no idea.
The consumer per capita income is much lower, but these middlemen who are entrepreneurs, their per capita income is equivalent to a German consumer. So, that opens up this whole set of companies you can create for that market segment where these are viable with similar models that you can export.
That's amazing. And to think of, again, and you have to have that on the ground knowledge to understand that you can segment a market as big as India into those subcategories, if you will, understanding, again, putting my design thinking hat on, understanding that just the user journey flow from user-centered need and fulfilling that need with a product or service and, through a viable business model. And when you understand that and then you look around for all the enablers in that journey, that's really fascinating.
Exactly. And think about some of the anti-patterns here, right? In the design thinking where, as an American investor, you'd go, marketplaces are all about disintermediation.
Yes.
And if I'm seeing a job marketplace in India, which is only used by recruiters, then that is rife for disruption. And then you go build a job marketplace where it turns out that somehow the direct connect between the candidates and the employers is just not converging into transactions. There's a lot of lemons there on both sides, and there's a lot of fraud in the system, et cetera, et cetera. That idea is just not working. You put more wood behind that arrow, and it's really going nowhere. The anti-pattern is, you build a marketplace that makes it easier for recruiters to connect candidates with the employers. So it's a recruiter to employer marketplace, and suddenly you have $1 billion business.
Wow, that's incredible. So as an entrepreneur, you have your own business. How much did writing this book help you as an entrepreneur? Were there any frameworks or use cases that you saw that connected you back to your business that you're starting or running, depending upon the time?
Oh, yes.
That seems like an easy one, but hard to choose one, right?
It is, and it was therapeutic for me, Jeff. I had done 3 companies before I wrote the book. I had no intention to write a book. I was writing blog posts, and a publisher sort of reached out saying, "You seem to have a point of view on something that is important for readers. What do you think about writing a book?" Around that time, I had figured that marketplaces in India, which is primarily what I was building with my first 3 companies, are very operationally intensive and not as technology enabled. And my heart was in building true technology leverage businesses with lower operational intervention. So I'd already reached a stage where I said, look, operational businesses I can invest in. Like, I'm an investor in Misho, for example.
Okay.
But I want to build technology first businesses, which are more sort of US market ideas, if you will, or it could be global ideas, but technology is the primary leverage for it. So this book was therapeutic in that sense that I was able to go deeper into that decision or thought process, get closure from myself on, look, I understand operationally intensive businesses deeply. I have a point of view. Now, it's sort of, it's catharsis. It's clear to me what my point of view on that is. And that's not what I want to do. These are things I want to do. And by the way, that catharsis helped me be a better investor. So I'm a shareholder in about 100 companies. I would say half of them are Indian companies. It sharpened my insight into what's a fundable idea or not. And it sharpened my insight on what is it that I want to build. How do I build these APIs and these technology enablers that help certain class of businesses, build better businesses? So Hypertrack is an enabler for entrepreneurs building field service marketplaces and, Uber for X sort of labor marketplaces.
Right.
So I guess I found myself through the process of writing this book that of all the things that I could be doing in the world, which are the things that I want to do? I want to invest in these class of ideas, and I want to build these kind of ideas and these markets and so on.
Fascinating. Well, it was interesting because I had, for those long listeners of the podcast, Jared McGriff, who was a guest in season 1, works at Kashyap in his business. And so with that being said, it's interesting to hear you come full circle in terms of now understanding the story and how you invest overseas informs you overseas from a US perspective, how you invest in overseas markets and bringing that with that 100+ investments, all of the signals that you're getting from their market activities and how you can use that to guide the company that you have here in the States that much more efficiently.
Well said, Jeff.
At the Berkeley Innovation Group, we are a strategy consultancy and AI advisory firm focused on mid-market companies looking to unlock big growth. In contrast to management consultants' typical top-down, hypothesis-driven approach, Big uses a curiosity-inspired, bottom-up approach, leveraging customer insights to drive strategy co-creation. Learn more about our approach by downloading our ebook at biginnovates.com/ebook. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back. So far, just an incredible conversation as we talk about the dynamics of Indian entrepreneurs coming to the United States and now seeing that flow of talent, capital, know-how back to India to create products that are not necessarily copycats of the West, but can find their own standalone markets in South Asia and throughout the region. And with that said, though, as an investor in those markets, the benefit that you've had in terms of using those as sources of information to bring into your work here in the US at your startup. And it leads me to a second topic that we talked a bit about offline, but just wanted to create some space here for you to share. How do you handle that flow of information, and not just tactically, what frameworks do you have for processing information, but what are you doing to train your mind? What are you doing to train your body, your spirit, in terms of creating a consciousness when you have so much information, so much activity, so much knowledge, so many thoughts? I know this is a passion of yours. Would you mind talking a little bit about it?
Yeah, and thanks for asking the question. And it's also connecting with the world of AI that we live in. If you're in tech, you ought to be thinking about artificial intelligence at this time and its profound impacts that I believe are going to happen in how we build technology and how consumers use technology. So while the world is obsessed about intelligence, I have actually been obsessed about consciousness. And I found that in a great book, which I'm currently reading, is The Blind Spot, is it dissects how the two disconnected from each other historically over the last few hundred years. So we all have person conscious experiences, and we try to make sense of those conscious experiences so that we can reconcile with what happened. We can predict what's going to happen. And to some extent, that was the birth of science. And you create these abstractions and these concepts, and like the idea of everything being built with irreducible small things, which are fundamentally solid and irreducible, is physicalism. And it's just a concept to understand some phenomena that we're experiencing in our conscious experience, right? In our conscious living. Unfortunately, there came a time where we started mistrusting our conscious experience, even disconnected from our conscious experience. And these abstractions and concepts themselves became our reality, to the extent that, we think everything is solid and everything is separate from each other and so forth. Turns out those are just concepts. That's not the reality. That is just a concept to understand certain phenomenology. Right. So I think artificial intelligence to me is sort of another extension of, conception and, taking language, building models on top of that to sort of predict, what's going to happen next. And yet it disconnects us from the source of consciousness. Let me try to make it a little less abstract.
No problem. I'm 50% tracking, but I think you're going to land us.
There is a neuroscientist called Mark Soames who said consciousness sits in the brainstem and not the cortex. Brainstem is where the emotions sit, and cortex is where the intelligence sits. Emotion is more fundamental to intelligence. Intelligence is just something we evolved as our species. So the profound impact of this theory is that any animal with a brainstem, which is basically all animals in the world, are conscious and capable of feeling emotion. They know what it's like to be them. That's what this work has proven. The human intelligence that evolved on top of that is just how our species evolved on top of that consciousness. What does that mean to us as human beings? What does that mean to our work? Emotion is more fundamental than thinking and thought. When I listen to people, I listen for emotion. I try to listen for, it's hard, but I try to listen for what emotion are they feeling right now, and what's the need that's stemming from that emotion, and what are the intellectual thought processes that might be stemming from those emotions and needs. It's a very scientific way of thinking in that it's all causal and structured, but to know that emotion is the source of where we're coming from helps connect with people, whether it's your customers or your colleagues or your investors, rather than intellect, right? And I think similarly with AI, we can really get into the rabbit hole of intelligence and yet remain disconnected from consciousness. Similarly, the climate crisis, similarly, the social divides in the world, the inequities in the world. I believe every company, every institution out there is there to solve a problem for people. And it's people solving problems for people. And the more we connect with our consciousness, the better we will become at solving those problems and deploying intelligence in the right way. And if we get lost in our intellect, disconnected from our emotions and our consciousness, we can keep trying, but it's like hamster on a flywheel, not going anywhere.
Right, right. So how has this helped you be present? I love the phrase of listening for emotion and to understand the thought process behind someone's emotions. Just makes you very aware. Certainly makes you very empathic in terms of not only your customers, but your employees and so forth. How has that helped you personally as you've developed as a leader?
Sure. A couple of examples I can think of. The old saying about if you were listening to your customers literally, you would have built a faster horse and not a car. So as product builders, we talk to customers, we research, we show them something, and we can look over their shoulders and watch them use a product, or we can have them talk about the product. What we actually build has to be congruent with what the users want. And often what the users want is they haven't thought of exactly what they want. They are sharing some things, but within that, you have to figure out what they really want. And that insight often comes from tapping into their stream of consciousness, understanding the emotion associated with certain pains or certain joy. And then you have access to, sort of the secret code for, okay, now I can build a product that really solves that problem, often in ways that they didn't even think about it. So as product builders, listening for where is this customer really coming from, or where are these customers really coming from, helps. The other example I can offer is, just when we're building products to deliver to these customers, once we've figured what, customers really want, there's all these interpersonal dynamics that play out. And especially in a remote first work culture, often the emotional stuff stays in the transactional stuff is what we talk about over video. Our ability to tune into the emotion behind a colleague showing up a certain way helps be more productive, helps solve the problem better because you know where they're coming from, instead of spending hours on the thought and the semantic and the language and the structures and the processes. It short circuits to, oh, this is how the person is feeling right now. And that's at the source of the contention here or the stuckness here. Let's go address that. Let's go talk about, let's go unlock that.
Right.
It's a deep topic. I mean, the conversation is not like, you don't want to be a therapist to your colleagues. That does not work. Understanding where they're coming from at an emotional level helps connect better and often clear the air for, a more productive conversation to happen.
I think it's so helpful to just take the time to practice that basic empathy. It doesn't have to be, I segmented into emotional empathy and cognitive empathy, right? Emotional empathy is sitting by the bedside and holding their hand, whereas cognitive empathy can be, I haven't experienced perhaps that diagnosis myself, but I can empathize with someone struggling with a diagnosis that could be life-altering. And as I said during the pandemic, right, we all want emotional empathy from our doctor, but our doctor can't give everyone emotional empathy or they would burn out. And so they do have to substitute in a bit of that conscious empathy. But as you said, or cognitive empathy, I apologize. But as you said, it still requires consciousness on the part of us to understand where we fit in that dynamic and to be present with ourselves. And then once we can learn to be present with ourselves, we can learn to be present with others. And what is sounding like a bit of the direction you're trying to move your organization is to this place of where we all have a consciousness of each other. We're not therapists to each other, but it's not solely transactional either. There's this consciousness that floats around us.
Very well said. With intellection, we tend to say, I agree, or I disagree, or this is true, or this is false, or this is correct, or this is incorrect. When with emotion or with consciousness, how the world is occurring to someone, there is no right or wrong. There's no true or false. There's no correct or incorrect. It's you're tapping into, wait, how are you seeing this? What is showing up for you? Where is this coming from? That whole intellection of right, wrong, true, false falls away, and we're able to meet each other where they are. Right? To take your doctor example, the doctor being aware of these 20 questions are all coming from a place of fear, and that fear might be associated with some compromised immunity, just changes everything, right? In how the doctor will engage with that patient. Here's a patient and imagine a system or a doctor or some technology interacting with the patient, not knowing that the core emotion is coming from the fact that one mistake might be life-threatening for an immunocompromised person who's asking all these questions. So I think I'm just trying to connect it to how these consciousness and emotion have no right, wrong, have no true, false, have no correct, incorrect. They just are. And tuning into that helps us just be with that and sit with that, and then trust that, our intellection will solve that.
And beyond your company, then, how do you, as an investor, practice that? I would imagine that dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs, they have a lot at stake in their venture's success, and that it's easy to conflate personal and professional when you put your heart into a new business. So how do you bring that idea of consciousness to the entrepreneurs that you work with, knowing that you're the person who has given the money, right, for equity in their business?
Oh man, I tell you, it's a game changer. My first question to an entrepreneur when they call me or, I'm meeting them is, how's your health? How are you feeling? How's family? And first times I started doing that, it felt very different to me because the first questions used to be, how's business? How are the metrics tracking? What are the number one problems you're solving right now that I can help you with, right? They're not the wrong questions, but then it takes you to a certain content. Once I started asking this, it was first very different for me. It just felt very different just asking it. And for the entrepreneur, they were like, none of my investors have asked me that. And it sounds like you genuinely want to know the answer. It's not the small talk for the first 5 minutes. You want to know how I'm feeling right now. And it's crazy the kind of stuff that comes up, man. It is so different. It seems far more effective in truly understanding and being able to help the entrepreneur. Also takes the pressure off that more than the achievement and the performance, this person cares about me. Yeah, that's sort of one example where, as an investor, it's just completely changed my relationship with these entrepreneurs. Often entrepreneurs, the best investments are the ones where they don't need the money and you have to fight your way to the cap table. These are the moments where entrepreneurs hear from others that, hey, you definitely want that guy on the cap table because he's the person you can call in your toughest days. Right? You're dealing with founder separation. You're dealing with a board conflict. You're dealing with the biggest customer lost and your company about to die. That's the person you call. And the reason you call is not because of the problem solving. That happens as a byproduct of it. You can visit that trauma and unpack it with a certain calm that often leads to being able to solve the problem better.
Amazing. Well, that's certainly a gift to the entrepreneurs that you mentor and those whom you are invested in. And I know the employees that work with you benefit from that as well. So, Kash, I can't thank you enough for taking the time today to join us. I can't thank you enough for sharing not only your strategic insights into how that cycle of U.S. and India investment and talent and ideas has grown, matured, and where that sits today. And then second part of the conversation where we really got personal. And I'm very grateful for you opening up, sharing about that. And hopefully it's a lesson that others can follow as they look to not only find a competitive edge, but more importantly, just build a better experience for whom they are responsible, their employees, etc. And so I just want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope your listeners find it useful.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll link to your book in the show notes, and we'll link to your LinkedIn so folks can connect there. But in the meantime, thank you, and we'll chat soon.